Welcome to the 23rd episode of Neon Galactic, a production of PBS affiliate Keat TV in Eureka, California. I'm your host, James Falk. Thanks for joining us. Before we get started and get into the meat of the mystery, so to speak, I'd like to remind you to subscribe and like and subscribe this video, as well as any other videos of mine that you watch. These come from a small nonprofit public television station in the Northwest California, the Northwest of America, and we can always use the support. I like to think that we have a good thing going on here with this show and the conversations that we're having. So your support is always very important in helping to keep that going. Today's guest is Bernardo Kastrup, and he has become an important part of our collective and ongoing realization that the world may be more than it seems. His several books, which will be linked in the description, hit me like a revelation. I haven't read them all, but the several that I did read totally shaped my view of how this conversation should be unfolding. Folks in these topics often struggle with society's largely unexamined verdict that notions like UAPs and consciousness and even the supernatural lack logical rigor. But Kastrup in his books goes to bat for these arguments, and I think leaves the reader unable to avoid the conclusion that it is at least as logical as the physicalism that we've long lived with in our society, and perhaps in a lot of ways, a lot more so. He builds a logical and philosophical series of arguments for the primacy of consciousness in the universe and for the idea of the universe as a kind of mind. He doesn't go into the theologics of it, and he sort of poses that notion and then backs up from that to sort of link how all of our minds are sort of individual filaments within that broader mind. It's a beautiful argument, sort of organic in how it unfolds, and it gives us purpose, which is what I think a lot of us would agree we lack in our current society, that there's no transcendent reason for us to exist, but in this ontology there is, and it's basically the idea of the universe waking up to itself to experience its full breadth and potential. Kastrup is an avowed idealist, and though his thinking is largely a departure from the current scientific paradigm, it succeeds in explaining much that otherwise gets ignored by that paradigm, like the hard problem of David Chalmers and others. His uncompromising arguments and reasoned conclusions helped me to accept that all the hackneyed materialist notions that underpin much of society's ideas of itself are no longer inviolable truths, but rather a kind of intellectual prison that we must ultimately escape from if we are to survive and thrive in the future and figure out what fate we should ultimately be enacting. So I'm happy to say thank you, Bernardo, for joining us. We beam across the Atlantic Ocean, I think, to get this conversation done. So
that's right. And thanks for having me. Thanks for the opportunity.
No problem. This is a pleasure for me. Absolutely. So, I mean, I have questions written down, and I have also subjects that I kind of wanted to cover. But first, let's start with your background and biography. I know that you're a scholar and that you're also a computer engineer. I'm interested, on a personal level, how you got into these topics, whether you had, an inkling or an epiphany that sort of led you to this approach, and also how it's informed by your, computational computer scientist background. Because I think that, the way that we've conceived of AI and mind, it seems like a lot of people who study computers end up with a fascinating and original view of how the intellect works. And I'm wondering if that informs your perspective as well.
Oh, it surely did. I mean, I sort of was born asking the big questions, the big philosophical questions. What's the nature of reality? What's the nature of the self? What is the relationship between consciousness and the seemingly material world around us? So I've always asked those questions, but they've taken, when I was 17 and I went to university, went to computer engineering college, they've taken a back seat. And I came out of that, and my first job was at CERN in Switzerland, in a big particle accelerator. I was part of the data acquisition team, developing the data acquisition system for the Atlas detector, which is part of the Large Hadron Collider.
Yeah.
And so that was my first job in life, and my life was sort of exploding. My dreams were coming true very early. And I was too busy with, the physics and the technical aspect of data acquisition to think about the deeper philosophical questions. But one thing we did do, we developed one traditional data acquisition system, which is in use now. But in parallel and illicitly, we developed another one based on artificial neural networks,
Ah,
AI.
yeah, yeah.
And we could show that the AI did as good as the knowledge of physics, human knowledge of physics. But we didn't use it because AIs at the time, they were rather small compared to today. The theory was just as advanced as now, more or less, but we didn't have the computers to deploy that stuff at large scales. So that was one factor. And the other factor is that AIs are a little bit of a black box. We don't know why they are doing what they are doing. There's
Yeah.
much more visibility into the processes now than there was in my time. But in my time, back in the mid 90s, they were really a black box. So we didn't use them. But the thought stayed in my mind, if I could develop an artificially intelligent system, and I knew I could, we had done it, what would it take for me to make it conscious? For me to make it experience its inner computations in the way I experience my inner computations. And after years thinking about this, 2, 3 years thinking about this, I hit a wall because whatever I thought of changing in my design, so to say, would have a bearing only on structure and function, and it would have nothing to do with experience. I would never have any more or any less reason to think that the AI is conscious after I did something compared to before I did it, whatever it would be that I would have done. And then I realized that I'm making some wrong assumption here. I have to, backtrack and find the place where I took a wrong turn and correct that. And I figured that that place was the assumption that consciousness is something that is created out of material arrangements. I realized that that was profoundly wrong and was leading to an alley. And I had to review that. And that was sort of the origin of idealism as far as I formulate it. Idealism has been around forever, but that was the birth of my own attempt to formulate a modern analytic version of idealism.
Now, so, but you went from, I mean, that's fascinating to me for several reasons. I mean, it sounds like you were on the leading edge of AI before there was really, I mean, to a large degree, the AI that systems and efforts that we see now. And it's interesting to me that it was a black box then, and it's a black box now. I mean, I think it says some interesting things. Why do you think that realization led to the transformation, I guess, of your life? I mean, now this is your work rather than the technological work you were doing at CERN. So was that realization something that transformative, or did that lead you into the kind of deductions that later made you develop this ontology?
It certainly has at least helped lead to those deductions
Hmm.
because it was a confrontation with a real world problem that had no solution on the basis of the standard mainstream physicalist ontology.
Yeah.
It just has no solution from that perspective. Anything you might change or improve or add or subtract as far as physical arrangements give you no more or no less reason, and no less reason to think that there is experience associated with that structure and that function that you just implemented. And David Chalmers encapsulated or framed this problem as the hard problem of consciousness, which is there is nothing about material arrangements or parameters in terms of which we could deduce in principle the qualities of experience. In other words, if an electron in your head is going to the left or going to the right, you have no reason to say electron going to the red is the color blue and electron going to the right is the color red. There is no logical bridge between the domains of physical parameters on the one hand and the domain of the qualities of experience on the other. The
Yeah.
bridge is merely empirical. We measure certain patterns of brain activity and we know that they correlate with certain experiences, but why and how that is under physicalism has no answer and cannot have an answer. That's the hard problem. The hard
Yeah.
problem illustrates an inner contradiction in the physicalist thought line. Now, so it was certainly a trigger for the deductions that came afterwards, but I still worked in technology for 25 years
So you
in
spent a whole
science and
career. Yeah.
technology. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I started a company that was eventually bought by Intel many years ago.
Wow.
I worked for ASML, which is a company that now everyone has heard of, especially in California, right? They make the chip making machines that go to TSMC in Taiwan and
Yeah.
Intel in Oregon,
Yeah.
all these chip makers. So I worked there for 15 years doing technology strategy, and philosophy went hand in hand with that. It was parallel with that. And it was very useful for those 25 years because, the other side of my life kept me grounded in reality. When you are in high tech, there is very, very little room and tolerance for nonsense, for ungrounded, you know, bull excrement. uh, you get caught very quickly if you start fooling yourself. And in philosophy, because there is a less direct empirical bridge to keep you honest at all times,
Yeah.
to put the mirror in front of you to show you your own nonsense at all times, there is less of that. You can sort of take off and lose contact with reality. And sure enough, that happens with many philosophers, even or especially academic philosophers. They completely lose touch with reality and they go off in fanciful avenues and lines of abstraction that are not, they're not provable and they're not falsifiable either. In
Yeah.
other words, you can keep on believing your nonsense forever.
Yeah.
If you believe in it strong enough, nobody can do anything about it. While in technology, if it doesn't work, it doesn't care if the world doesn't care if it's a beautiful design,
Exactly. A beautiful
or
idea. It's just
yeah,
crap. I mean,
yeah,
ultimately,
or
right?
that it
Yeah.
must work. No, it doesn't, and that's it. That's all there is to it. So it kept me honest, and that mentality helps me today. Still, I keep myself honest now with that kind of no nonsense mentality.
Well, that's part of your honesty is, or your rigor, I would say, is what's fascinating about your line of argument as opposed to anything else I've read on the subject. Like you lay out a logical series of, reasoning or whatever you want to call it, reasons as to why this is logical and it's not a departure from the sense of reality that we have collectively, but it is a whole different approach. And I mean, you went as far as publishing books where you've had individual chapters actually peer reviewed in different periodicals with the notion ultimately of putting it all in a book. It's as if, I mean, I'm putting the thoughts in your head, but it's as if you're confronting what you know to be skeptics who are going to demand that kind of rigor and saying, okay, well, here it is. And I've done that homework and that legwork, and it still bears out. And then you have other books that sort of take a different approach, like More Than Allegory, which, I mean, it has that rigor in it. But then at the end, you kind of get into a fictional space where, I mean, the argument in the book is that making a myth that resonates with you internally is as useful and insightful as the myths that we inherit. I mean, there's a lot to that myth argument, which I want to get to in a little bit. But let's first talk about your actual ontology. I mean, you say you're a idealist. Can you describe for us what that means for you? And we'll start from there.
Yeah. So idealism means that all reality is mental in essence. In other words, all reality is of the same metaphysical kind as your thoughts and emotions. It doesn't mean that reality is your thoughts and emotions. No, it's something of the same metaphysical kind as your thoughts and emotions. Now, I espouse a form of objective idealism that I call analytic idealism, which says that there is a real external world outside our individual minds.
Yeah.
There is a world out there in which we live, which we share, and which will do what it does regardless of whether we are here to observe it or not. The world out there, the external world, would be whatever it is, even if we were not here. And it doesn't give much of a damn about our morning affirmations, if you know what I mean. It will not change because we may not like it the way it is. It is what it is.
Yeah.
But analytic idealism would then go on and say, and that external world that is real and it's really out there is constituted of mental states of the same metaphysical kind as your mental states. But it is not constituted of your or my mental states. They are mental states out there in the world, external to us. This is not difficult to understand because my thoughts are mental states,
Mhm.
yet they are external to you. From your perspective, my thoughts are objective. My thoughts will not change just because you secretly wish for them to be different. And my thoughts would still be here even if you were not there. In exactly the same way, analytic idealism would say nature, the external world, is constituted of mental states that would still be there even if we were not here. They are not our mental states, but they are still mental.
Yeah. And the interesting part about that for me was the idea that the physical universe is the I don't know exoteric or visible mental state of a broader being, the universal being or the universal brain, so to speak. And as if I could see objectively your thoughts, to me it would be signals and maybe chemical reactions, the correlations with the mind that we have been able to track in a lab and stuff. But it would be physical things that would be representing those thoughts, but that those aren't actually those thoughts. And so that kind of gives permission for the universe to develop phenomenon that are outside of our understanding and completely alienated from what we would think of as a mental state, because it's something that we're not enmeshed in, I guess, in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, we mistake representation for thing in itself.
Yeah.
Even though Kant and Schopenhauer already elaborated on this in the late 18th and early 19th century, we still systematically conflate the two. Um, Under analytic idealism, what we call physicality, colloquially, in other words, the things we see, touch, hear, smell, taste, um, these are the indications on an inner dashboard.
Mhm.
So let me extend that metaphor. Imagine an airplane.
Mhm.
An airplane has sensors that measure the states of the sky outside the airplane, sensors that measure air humidity, air speed, pressure variations, and so on and so forth. Um, and then the results of those measurements are presented to the pilots in the form of dashboard indications, in the form of the movement or position of little dials inside meters on a dashboard. Now, the state of the dashboard is a representation of the state of the sky, and it conveys accurate information about the sky, so much so that you can fly an airplane by instruments. You can paint the windows of the airplane black so the pilots cannot see the sky, and they would still be able to fly safely and land safely just by looking at the dashboard because the dashboard represents the sky. But the dashboard isn't the sky. It it doesn't even look like the sky.
Mhm.
A dashboard indication doesn't look like the clouds and lightning and wind outside or the horizon.
Yeah.
Yet it represents all that accurately. Now, in just the same way, we have sensors, retinas, eardrums, outer surface of the skin, inner lining of the nose, surface of the tongue. And these sensors make measurements of the states of the world around us, those external, real mental states around us. The results of those measurements are then presented to us in our internal dashboard, just like the airplane. We call this dashboard perception, the stuff we see, hear, taste, touch, smell. Um, and we call it physical. The stuff we see is physical. Look, this bottle of water, this metal bottle of water, is a representation on my dashboard, and we call it physical. It's a physical bottle of water, just like your phone, just like even your body. When you represent your own body on your in a dashboard, in other words, when you see or touch or
Mhm.
smell your body. But we make the mistake no pilot makes. We take the dashboard for the sky outside because the dashboard correlates with the states of the external world, correlates so well, in fact, that we can fly by instruments, which is what we all do. We fly by instruments at all times.
Yeah, yeah.
Because of that, we think the dashboard is the sky. We think the physical world is the real world. And under analytic idealism, it's not. The physical world, what appears on the dashboard, is a representation of the real world, which is itself non physical. It is mental. It is not physical in the sense that it cannot be described through physical quantities. It is non physical in the sense that a thought is non physical. What is the length in inches of your thought? What is the weight in pounds of your emotion? Mental states are not describable through physical quantities, but the dashboard states, in other words, physical states are, because we invented those physical quantities to describe the state of the dashboard. But the world as it is in itself is not describable through physical quantities. In other words, it's not physical.
Yeah. You were just covering there one of the important parts, I think, of your argument, which is you start from a base of ontological primitives that everyone recognizes, to use your term, ontological primitive, which I like. That, I mean, we all understand consciousness, we all experience consciousness, and anything outside of that is not immediately experienced because it goes through the filters, like you're saying, the dashboard of our own sensual or sensory perception. So I think that by using such arguments, you show that idealism actually takes fewer leaps logically than the other systems that we've developed over the years because it's an actual we're actually closer, or the truth is actually more apparent under those arguments. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah. Should I comment on this?
yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Um, the mistake we made this mistake fairly early, like
Hmm.
300 to 400 years ago. But when we made this mistake, we knew it was a mistake. We did it anyway because it was a good political weapon against the church.
Hmm.
And here's what happened. Um, we have our internal dashboard. In other words, the world of perception. Perception is mental. It has qualitative experiences, or it has qualities of experience, like what it is like to see the redness of a strawberry, what it is like to feel the bitterness of disappointment. This is qualitative stuff. We
Hmm.
live in a qualitative world, the world of the dashboard. And at some point, with Galileo, we discovered that we can describe this qualitative world through quantities. It facilitates communication at
Yeah.
first, and then it facilitates modeling and prediction later. It's useful for me to describe that the piece of luggage I'm carrying weighs 50 pounds, because I can then tell you this weighs 50 pounds, and you will know what experience to expect when you try to lift my piece of luggage.
Yeah.
And it's useful to tell the barman that you want half pint of beer instead of 1 pint of beer. So all these numbers, one, half, 50, 25, these are descriptions of qualities of experience. That's how they arose. And then we could use these descriptions to predict what would be our next qualities of experience. In other words, what we would see next to predict the behavior of nature as
Yeah.
represented on the dashboard of perception. And this is all good and fine. The problem is that in order to escape the jurisdiction of the church had jurisdiction over everything that was psyche, in other words, spirit, soul, or mind. These three words are translations of the Greek word psyche.
Hmm.
Mind is therefore sort of a synonym for spirit.
Hmm.
Um, so science, in order not to be burned at the stake like Giordano Bruno was in
Hmm.
the year 1600, they decided that they would say, no, 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 we only busy ourselves with the quantities, Mrs. Church. You can have the qualities for yourself. And the way to do that was to say these descriptions of the qualities of experience, the 50 pounds, the kilometers, the hertz, the joules, the centimeters, and so on, they are not only descriptions, they are the world as it is in itself. The description it was then supposed to precede the thing described.
Hmm.
The map was supposed to precede the territory, and we were supposed to somehow reach into the map and pull the territory out of it. We mistook our descriptions for the thing that is described, and we said that the qualities of experience, oh no, that's just created inside our brain in some way that we have no idea how it works, but it's surely created inside our head by our brains. Those qualities are not out there. The redness of the strawberry is not out there. It's
Hmm.
in here inside my head. What is really out there is the 30 grams that the strawberry weighs,
Hmm.
or the 1 inch that the strawberry measures. In other words, the descriptions are what are really out there. And the thing described is somehow in here and somehow arises from the descriptions. Now, people knew at the time that this was utter nonsense. Denis Diderot, one of the two authors of La Encyclopédie, the founding document of the Enlightenment, is on record saying materialism doesn't work, but we have to use it as a weapon against the church.
Yeah.
But around the mid 19th century, we forgot that it was just a social political weapon, and we started believing that the map precedes the territory.
Yeah.
And then we stopped looking at consciousness for basically over 100 years because it became a discombobulating question. Consciousness is supposed to be a byproduct of the brain inside your skull. It doesn't have a role in the causal nexus. It does nothing. It is completely unimportant. So let's not study it. Well, the real reason is let's not study it because we took a wrong turn long back and now it's impossible for us to make sense of it. So trying to study it would just lead to frustration. But around the 1970s, the study did begin, and then Chalmers formulated the hard problem. And the hard problem basically means only the following. It's not a problem to be solved. It's an internal contradiction of
Yeah.
a pig-headed and idiotic line of thinking. And the contradiction is the following. The lines on a map only have meaning when they refer to features of the territory, right? You know that the lines that represent a mountain on the map refer to the height of the territory corresponding to them. We know that the colors of the map, the meaning of the colors of the map exists because they refer to qualities of the territory that the map describes. Uh, uh, if you had a map but had never seen a territory in your life, the map would have no meaning. The lines and the colors would mean nothing because their meaning is semantically grounded on the thing the map describes.
Yeah.
When materialists say quantities are the real world and qualities are a byproduct of brain activity, they are putting the map before the territory. And in doing so, the map loses its meaning
Exactly right.
because it cannot refer to the territory anymore, since the territory is supposed to arise from the map, to
Yeah.
come after the map. And then the map has no meaning. This is the hard problem. Kilograms, hertz, inches, pounds, these things only have meaning insofar as they refer to some quality of experience. The weight of a piece of luggage, or the needle of a weighing instrument moving when you put the piece of luggage on it, or how the piece of luggage moves when falling down into a viscous fluid. These are all things we perceive, and therefore they are qualitative experiences. If you withdraw all these semantic references from the numbers being nothing, and therefore you cannot deduce the qualities of experience from them.
Yeah.
It's
It's like
like
they're two
trying
different
to
languages almost. I mean, it's like
yeah,
one, yeah.
yeah. It's not a
Uh,
problem to be solved. It's just a contradiction of an idiotic line of thinking that has been granted plausibility in a very artificial way because of cultural context. That's all there is to it.
yeah. And it's hopefully forcing a rethink, which I think that you're part of the vanguard of that. One aspect of your ontology that I wanted to sort of get out there so people could understand it was the idea of alters. I mean, one consequence of your thinking is that we are enmeshed in this universe, a part of it, and therefore it's understandable to us, maybe in ways that are outside the intellectual pursuits, like some sort of realizations or insights that sort of bubble up from the subconscious or whatever, and that may be more connected to the universe than we've previously allowed. And I think that that's fascinating, and it sort of goes with your idea of an alter for what we are as a mind, that basically dissociation, like we find in multiple personality disorder and other kinds of things like that, there are minds within minds that are totally cut off because they're not, there's no nexus between them, but they are still nested within each other, at least on the surface level, but maybe deeper on, maybe the roots are shared. If I'm mistaking that, please correct. But could you explain what the alter, principle is, and how our minds are branches of the universal mind, but still our own worlds?
Yeah. So look, the metaphor of the airplane requires something that defines the airplane um, a- as opposed to the sky it is flying in. So the dashboard represents the external states of the sky to the pilots inside the airplane. So for there to be an outside and an inside, you have to have a boundary separating the two. Otherwise, the pilots are just flying naked in the sky, and they don't need any dashboard. They feel the states of the sky directly. So what creates this separation between my individual mind and the external mental states of the world beyond me? Because if it's mental states inside and mental states outside, what is it that separates the two? Now, we know empirically that there is a phenomenon in mind that does happen in mental space. It's called dissociation. And what it does is exactly that. It creates cognitive boundaries within what is otherwise one mental space. People with an extreme form of dissociation called the dissociative identity disorder, which before the DSM-5 used to be called multiple personality disorder, has been
Uh-huh.
portrayed in films and
Yeah,
books.
yeah.
They can have seemingly disjoint centers of awareness. Each one of them attributes a name to itself, different from the others. Each one of them seems to have different memories, different personality traits, sometimes even different health conditions. And sometimes they are aware of each other and sometimes they are not, but they experience themselves as being separate from the other alternative personalities or alters. Now, we've known this for hundreds of years, but only since the early 21st century, with the advent of neuroimaging, we know for sure that people are not faking this. We know for sure that this is a real phenomenon because we now can even diagnose dissociative identity disorder using a functional brain scanner, an fMRI. We know that dissociative processes look different from the mental processes of people pretending to be dissociated. We know
Well,
that because we did the experiment.
well, and you talk about the in your book about the blind person or the blind alter who was not getting
Oh
any
yeah.
input to their visual cortex when they were in the blind personality, which I mean, I know about people having disciplined minds, but I don't think they're able to wall off whole sections of their brain to
Yeah,
make a.
yeah, this is a famous case from Germany in 2015. It's a clinical case. It was not a research project that was defined in advance. It's just two therapists who had a patient who displayed multiple alters, and I think two of the alters claimed to be blind, not to be able to see. And these clinicians had the wonderful idea of instrumenting this patient with an EEG cap to measure her brain activity and make the measurements while blind alter had executive control of the person. In other words, had control over the Broca's area in order to be able, in order to speak and move the body and so on.
Yeah.
And the same measurements when either the host personality or a sighted alter was in control. And lo and behold, when a blind alter was in control, there was no activity in the visual cortex at the back of the brain, even though the woman's eyes were open. And we knew the woman, physiologically speaking, could see. And when a sighted alter assumed executive control, then normal brain activity would return to the visual cortex. Now you cannot fake this. This is impossible to fake, and it shows that dissociation is literally blinding to what is right in front of your wide open and well functioning eyes.
Mhm.
It can make you blind to that. Of course, it can make you blind to what's happening in China right now, or it can make me blind to your thoughts right now. But even before this clinical, sort of a um, convenient experiment that was done in 2015, here in the Netherlands in 2014, a team led by Jolanda Schlumpf, they took a group of patients clinically diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, and then they hired another group of actors and they asked the actors to pretend to themselves, which is a good acting technique. You pretend to yourself that you are the character you want to portray.
Mhm.
You have to feel the character from within and not only pretend from the outside.
Method
And they
acting,
asked the
maybe.
actors, please pretend that you are dissociated and you have multiple alters. And they put these two groups under a functional brain scanner to measure the brain activity of both. And then they asked a group of doctors to try to to distinguish the two groups based only on the brain scans. In other words, the doctors didn't know whether a brain scan came from a clinically diagnosed patient or from an actor. They didn't know that. They were only asked to classify the brain scans into two groups. And they wanted to see whether the groups would be classified along the lines expected. In other words, could a radiologist correctly identify the group of actual patients and differentiate them from the group of actors based solely on the brain scanners in a double-blind fashion? And lo and behold, they could. There is something real dissociation looks like. It looks like something identifiable. And under analytic idealism, what does dissociation of the universal mind look like? Well, it looks like biology. It looks
Yeah.
like metabolism. Every living being under analytic idealism is what a dissociated alter of the mind of nature looks like when it's represented on our internal dashboard.
Yeah.
When we look at the representation of an alter on the dashboard, we see a living person moving around, speaking or talking to you via the internet, like
Or
we are doing right
it could
now.
be animals too, right? I mean, it's
Of
all living
course,
things. Plants,
all
they all
living
have a
things.
quality of existence.
Yes,
I mean,
everything,
arguably.
everything that has metabolism, because metaphorically speaking, if you take a strong enough microscope and you zoom in deep enough into every living creature, they look the same. When you look at the biochemical details of metabolism, every living being, despite their appearances at outer levels, like the difference between me and a cat and an amoeba or a praying mantis, these differences disappear when you zoom in into the molecular details of metabolism. Metabolism unifies all life, and it allows us to say all life belongs in one category. So if my physical body is what my dissociated mental processes look like to you, and I am a metabolizing organism, then on the same basis, when you look at an amoeba and you see a metabolizing organism, then the amoeba too is a dashboard representation of dissociated processes in the mind of nature.
Mhm. Yeah, and the external things that we see, the objects, are the externalized view of the universal mind's internal processes, right?
Yeah, here's a critical point, because a lot of people, when I say, well, life is what dissociation looks like, and then people go like, what about my mobile phone? What about the computer? What about the internet? What about your bottle of water? These are also things, just like living organisms are things.
Mhm.
So could they too reflect private conscious inner life, dissociated conscious inner life?
Which some people
And
argue. I mean, with
yeah,
panpsychism, like that.
exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, the mistake there is in projecting onto nature the structure of our language. The fact that we have different names for things in nature doesn't mean that they are actually things separate from the rest of nature. For instance, we have names for different oceans: the Pacific, the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic. Are they separate things? Where does the Pacific end and the Indian Ocean begin? We can arbitrarily define the boundary, but that boundary is nominal. We impose it on nature by convenience. Where does the river end and the ocean begin? Where does the car end and the road begin? Without the road, the car doesn't move. Without the air, the engine doesn't combust and the car doesn't move. Without the gravity of the planet that pulls the tires of the car to the road, the car doesn't move. Uh, So or things like a table which has four legs. Some panpsychists struggle with this ridiculous problem I'm going to describe now. Let's say the table is conscious and it has four legs, and the four legs plus the top of the table together, they are one conscious being. All right, what if I pull out one of the legs? Now, does the leg I pull out have its own private conscious inner life separate from the conscious inner life of the rest of the table? If it does, what if I nail the leg back to the table? Do their conscious inner lives now merge back together? Or a boulder on top of a mountain? That boulder is intrinsic to the mountain. It's the same rock formation. But what if there is a storm and the boulder detaches and comes bouncing down the side of the mountain? Does it acquire a separate conscious inner life when it's flying in the air? And does it rejoin with the mountain every time it touches the mountain as it bounces down? And you quickly realize that these questions are stupid.
Hmm.
And they are stupid because there is no boulder, there is no mountain, there is no table, there is no leg of the table. These things exist only in language. These are names we attribute to aspects of the inanimate universe. But there is only the inanimate universe as a whole. We arbitrarily, and for convenience reasons, carve out subsets of this whole, and we attribute names to these subsets. And then we speak of a metal bottle of water, or
Hmm.
a telephone, or a computer. But these are that there is no ontic ground for saying that these things have a reality of their own as distinct from the reality of their surroundings. Only for living beings can we do that. Why? Because if you take a needle and you stick it in my arm, I feel it. But if you stick it in the arm of the armchair I'm sitting on, I don't feel it.
Hmm.
And this difference between what I do feel and what I don't feel, I experience photons that hit my retina, but I don't experience photons that hit my eyebrow. I smell molecules that touch the inner lining of my nose, but I don't smell molecules that are locked up in the bathroom downstairs. So we have grounds for defining a boundary that separates living beings from the rest of the universe. But we have no such ground for separating a table from the rest of the universe. So the answer to the question of is a table conscious, is a mobile phone conscious, or is a computer conscious? The answer is there is no table, there is no mobile phone, there is no computer, there is only the inanimate universe as a whole. Now, that is conscious under analytic idealism.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a beautiful rendering, and one that I'm more and more convinced is absolutely true. One of the most impactful parts of, I think, your philosophy and the subjects of your books is the restoration of meaning for human existence. I think that we talked a little bit about this when you were talking about in the Renaissance when it started, we were trying to get away from the church's philosophic clutches or whatever, and so we had to sort of create these arguments that would allow us to view things differently. But in the meantime, since we've gotten obsessed with quantity over quality, now we've lost all meaning altogether. Can you talk a little bit about how this ontology provides, and I think that you've mentioned it as sort of the evolution of the universe, us to experience the universe for the universe, which is kind of a mind bender. But can you talk about why meaning is um, an important part of
Yeah,
what you're thinking?
yeah. When we started actually believing the nonsense of materialism around the middle of the 19th century, it was a time when the intellectual elites not only wanted to survive the church, they wanted to supplant the church as far as hegemony in society. So they had to up the ante, so to say. And then they started believing that nonsense. That was one of the motivations. The other motivation was to get rid of the greatest fear humans have always had throughout the vast majority of our history, which is the fear of what we will experience after we die. This has been the greatest fear in our history. It's the fear that the church used to control the entire continent of Europe for 1.5 millennium.
Yeah.
So it's a major fear. Kings would bow to this fear. Everybody would bow to this fear. People would give fortunes to get an indulgence from the church, piece of paper that would guarantee that they would have good experiences after they die, like in paradise.
Yeah.
And the move that was done around the middle of the 19th century got rid of it. And it's one of the greatest psychological motivations in the entire cultural history of mankind, humankind.
It's an important
Um,
point.
because at that point, there was nothing to fear because you wouldn't be there to experience anything. All of your fears, your anxieties, all of your troubles, your regrets, everything was guaranteed to have an end date. And you would still even have an exit button. If things got unbearable, you could press that button and boom, it's all over. You
Mhm.
wouldn't be there to experience it anymore. So that was a fantastic psychological motivation for what happened then and still happening now. The problem is we paid an equally fantastic price for that, which is we got rid of the meaning of life. Because the price was the following: for you to believe that once your body loses its integrity, your consciousness disappears, you have to believe that consciousness is a byproduct of material arrangements. Otherwise, you have no reason to think that you will stop experiencing when your body loses its integrity.
Yeah.
You would have no grounds for that. You have to believe that consciousness is a byproduct of certain physical arrangements. Therefore, um, everything that you've learned at great cost, at great suffering throughout your life, the exquisitely difficult process of growing up and maturing and learning and becoming a little less unwise than you were a decade before. Everything that you figured out, all of your insights, when you look back and you think of your younger self and you're compassionate about yourself because you know that there were so many things you didn't understand, you didn't know, you didn't grasp. Well, all of those things that happened for you to attain this more wise point of view, those insights under physicalism, they will matter not, because once you're dead, all of your insights are dead with you. All of your learnings, all of your maturity, your evolution, your betterment as a part of nature, it's all gone. And if it's guaranteed to be gone at some point, then it matters not already now. There is a sense in which it is as good as gone already now because it's guaranteed to be gone eventually.
Hmm.
And that gives you a lot of moral license, um, but it pulls the rug of meaning from under your feet. You are no longer standing on a ground of meaning. You're no longer couched by meaning in life. Because whatever happens or doesn't, whatever you do or don't, ultimately it's for nothing. Because even the whole of humanity, even the whole of our culture, our history, our civilization, they too are guaranteed to end because one day the sun will explode. We know that. And it will all be gone. We lost meaning. And also, we lost meaning because under physicalism, consciousness is an epiphenomenon. It's a side effect of matter.
Yeah.
And what do we identify with? With our body? Of course not. If you lose your arm in war, you're still you, right? If you receive a heart transplant or if they put a mechanical heart in you, you're still you. We don't identify with the body. We experience the body as a tool. What we identify with is our conscious inner life, our thoughts, our emotions, our insights, our goals, our comprehension, our fears, anxieties. That's what we identify with. Um, and in saying that this stuff is all epiphenomenal or side effects, what we are doing is we are making ourselves exceptions in nature, ephemeral byproducts of nature. In other words, we don't really belong here.
Yeah.
We are a fluke of nature. A
And
fluke.
utterly meaningless. There's no
Yeah,
point to us at
yeah,
all. It's like, yeah,
yeah. But
sawdust or whatever.
under idealism, this comes back because under idealism, everything is mental, the whole of nature. So we belong here.
Mhm.
We are of the same kind as the entire universe around us. We belong together because we are part of one another. Under analytic idealism, your insights don't disappear when you die because life is what the dissociative process looks like. So death is the end of the dissociation, not the end of your inner life. Upon death, your conscious inner life, everything you learned, your maturity, your insights that you conquered at great cost, with great suffering, they become available to nature at large because the dissociative boundaries disappear.
Ah,
Now, nature can know what you know and what you know thanks to a lot of suffering through this lifetime. So, death is a harvesting, death is your ultimate contribution to the mind of nature, which you will then again become. So everything is meaningful. Nothing is ephemeral. Nothing is for nothing. So all of that returns. Unfortunately, what returns to is the question, what will we experience after we are dead? That question returns too, but hopefully we'll be able to deal with it in a more mature way than we did before.
Yeah, and at least the basis of our identity and experience won't be extinguished, so that offers some ray of hope that there may be awareness that goes along with that
That's
survival.
correct. But few people see this with the clarity that you just demonstrated when you chose your words.
Yeah.
Um, our experiences don't end, our memories don't end, and our identity doesn't end because our identity is memory bound. So if memory is preserved, identity is preserved.
Yeah.
But personal agency goes. You are no longer going to act as an agent separate from the rest of the universe because with the end of the dissociation, that distinction disappears. So
Yeah.
now you are the universe. You're no longer a dissociated agent uh, trying to find your way around the universe. So personal agency is gone. Just like the personal agency of your dream avatar is gone when you wake up. Your dream avatar is dead, it's toast. When you
Yeah.
wake up, your dream avatar is gone, it's
Yeah.
toast. In the same way, when we die, this avatar, this dissociated process, is gone because it's no longer dissociated. That's what death is. Death is the end of the dissociation. But just as we remember the dream when we wake up, the mind of nature will remember our personal life when the dissociation ends. So
Yeah.
even that identity, that thing you used to be, continues to exist in the form of memories.
Yeah.
You know, when you wake up, you don't mourn the death of your dream avatar because you know that nothing was lost. You still remember the dream.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah. It
remembered
just
it
becomes a bigger
then when
part
you
of
were
a bigger
dreaming.
context. Yeah.
Exactly, just in a bigger context. In exactly the same way, I think the end of the dissociation is not the end of anything that matters regarding us, but it is the end of personal agency. It is the end of the opportunity to act as an agent separate from its context, because now we are the context. The agent is the context. So
Yeah.
it's the end of individuality. And a lot of people think that they cannot figure out emotionally in their own minds how the end of individuality is not a problem.
Yeah.
They think it is a problem. They think that if what survives is some kind of cosmic mind, then they are really dead. It's like the dream avatar thinking in the dream that, oh, if that guy wakes up, then I'm really dead. Which is a screwed up thought that can only arise while you're dreaming, right?
Yeah.
It cannot arise after you wake up because you see how senseless it is. And yet a lot of people struggle with this thought. A lot of people think that if their personal agency ends, then they are really gone. And then fear comes back. Or you can have a different kind of fear, which is the fear I have. I'm not preoccupied about the survival of my personal agency at all. Doesn't
Mhm.
matter the least bit to me. But we know that the transition process, the ego dissolution process, that you can undergo, for instance, with high dose psychedelics.
Mhm.
Psychedelics do that. Psychedelics, the way they work is by massively reducing brain activity, particularly in the so-called default mode network, which is the seat of personal agency. It's where the me resides. It's in the
Wow.
default mode network of the brain. And psychedelics reduce brain activity, especially in that area, and then people experience that as what is described in the technical literature, well, also in the popular literature, as ego dissolution. And you can see that, in the renaissance of psychedelic studies that is going on now for 15 years.
Mhm.
There's a lot of research done in ego dissolution, and we know, and I know it from experience, that it's very hard. You truly think you're dying. It's a very, very hard experience. After you've undergone this a few times, then it's not fun at all anymore because you know that nothing is being lost, nothing is dying here. What becomes hard is to come back. It's to reconstitute the ego. That feels very claustrophobic. But
Interesting.
so I am afraid of what would then be a psychedelic trip times 1,000.
Yeah.
Because if psychedelics only reduce brain activity, imagine what happens when you are no longer having any brain activity at all. That kind of ego dissolution uh, is probably a very difficult transition process. And I
Yeah.
fear that. I don't fear the end of my personal agency. I fear what a roller coaster that transition may be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating thought. So one of the things that I liked about the More Than Allegory, which is like I said, the most recent book of yours I read, was your discussion of myth. First of all, you point out that myth is everywhere. That, I mean, anything that we collectively decide as is a reality, and sort of we all kind of, work within that scheme, is a functionally a myth. But since we've been involved in this materialistic myth, and it's led to environmental degradation and social, a lack of cohesion, all those problems, you advise in that book that we need to begin to construct a new system of myths to accommodate these realizations and to give us back meaning. And you actually dedicate part of that book to constructing a myth that involves these elements. So I guess I want to talk about myth and how do we collectively, as humanity, begin to explore and even define a myth that we can all buy into that is true enough to represent the reality, but not literally true, because you make that distinction in the book. It's like if it sings to you, like if you have, if it resonates with you, it's okay to accept that on a level, but then not necessarily accept it on a literal level, which I think for some people might be a hard to distinguish. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about giving yourself permission to believe something that you don't think is literally true, but represents something that is true?
Yeah. So I need to give some context because
Yes.
you're saying this because you read an entire book. So by the
I
time you
know, I
got to
know.
this, there was already a lot of context.
You should be hosting
Um,
this show. I'm jumping around too much.
no, it's okay. But just to help the audience who I have to assume have not read the book,
Yeah.
um, look, there are several layers here. In the first layer, any story we tell ourselves about reality that contradicts empirical observation is just wrong. It's
Mhm.
just wrong. So forget about it. That's the lowest and easiest level. If your theory says that sometimes when you drop an object, it falls up as opposed to down, then your theory is wrong. Your myth is wrong.
Yeah.
So let's just forget about it. Okay. So the, most of the nonsense goes away with that. Most of the nonsense on the fringes of our philosophy and pseudoscience goes away with that. Empirical observation just contradicts a postulate of the myth, so the myth is just discardable. There's no value in it. It's just a form of self deception, and we don't want to do that, I assume. And then there is a higher level, which is the story is consistent with observation, but its elements don't need to be real for the story to be useful. Most of good science, if not all, falls into this second layer, into this second category. Let me give you an example. Newton in the 17th century is celebrated by having proposed the force of gravity, an invisible force that acted instantaneously at a distance and pulled objects together. So the apple falls to the ground because of this invisible force that acts instantaneously at the apple and pulls it towards the earth, the same way that the earth is pulled towards the apple. But because the earth is much bigger, we don't notice this latter part. We only notice the apple falling towards the earth. Well, this is clearly consistent with observation. Objects do fall.
Mhm.
The moon is locked in the gravity of the earth, as if something were pulling the earth to the moon. Like when you rotate a rock attached to a piece of string and you rotate it around, the rock rotates because that piece of string imparts a force on it. So the rock doesn't just fly away. But if you cut the string, the rock flies away. Well, the moon is not flying away. There is a rope connecting it to the earth. There is a force, but it's obviously invisible, right? So the empirical observations conform with the theory. But the element of the theory is a fantasy. The force of gravity is a fantasy. Give me the force of gravity. Can you give it to me? Can you hand it over to me? It's not a
Nope.
thing. It's invisible. So in philosophy of science, we call these convenient fictions. They are fictions, but nature works as though the fictions were true, and that's all we need to do good science, because that's all we need to predict what nature will do next.
Exactly.
If nature behaves itself as though the fiction were true, we use the fiction to predict what nature will do next, right?
Look at quantum
Now,
mechanics, right? We've been doing that for over 100 years.
exactly. No, let's stick to gravity.
Yeah,
Newton's force is now disregarded. There is no such invisible force because that fiction is no longer convenient. It didn't
yeah.
explain the orbit of Mercury, for instance. It didn't explain gravitational lensing. You don't need to know these technical details, but the point is when you
It broke
start looking
down.
close,
Yeah.
yeah, when you start looking more details to nature, the fiction can cease to be convenient. There are things that it no longer can correctly predict. So now we have a new convenient fiction. There is no invisible force of gravity. Gravity isn't even a force. What is happening is that the invisible fabric of space-time can bend and twist. That's what's happening. Now, again, the question, can you hand me over the invisible fabric of space-time? Can you give it to me? No, you can't. It's our current convenient fiction. And by the way, there are things it can't make sense of in the quantum level. So now we are thinking about loop quantum gravity and saying, no, 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 even the invisible fabric of space-time, even that is secondary. It's an epiphenomenon that emerges from quantum level abstract processes. So convenient fictions change. So that's the second layer of myth.
Yeah.
Myths that are consistent with empirical observation until they are not. The entities proposed in those myths are convenient fictions, but they are convenient until they are not. In other words, those myths are not literally true either, but they are operationally useful.
Yeah.
That's science.
Mhm.
Now let's get to the third level finally. Now I gave the context. The third level is the following. What makes we think that monkeys that have been running around this rock for only 200 or 300,000 years, who have been able to think symbolically, conceptually, abstractly for only the last 30 to 50,000 years, keep in mind that life has existed on this rock, on this planet, for 4 billion years.
Mhm.
We are able to think conceptually for about 50,000 of those 4 billion years. In other words, it's not even the blink of an eye ago. It just happened,
Yeah.
you know, a fraction of a second ago. What makes us believe that with this very, very youthful conceptual armor that evolved in the minds of primates that we are, should be capable of capturing every salient aspect of nature? That's preposterous. It's preposterous to think that we can come up with a convenient fiction uh, that captures everything that is salient about nature, everything that is salient regarding the meaning of life and our role. It's preposterous to think that.
Yeah.
But every scientific theory is a convenient fiction. So it's preposterous to think that science alone can capture every salient aspect of what is actually going on. Because monkeys are not in the business of finding ultimate truths,
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah.
Monkeys are not in that business. Monkeys are in the business of being less wrong about what's going on. That's the game. We
Yeah.
try at every step to be less wrong than the previous step, correcting our own mistakes. But we are not in the business of figuring it all out. So if we want to have a relationship with what we could call the transcendent aspects of reality, things that are real, that are salient, they matter to our sense of meaning, to our sense of identity, um, but which cannot be captured conceptually by the convenient myths that monkeys come up with. If we want to have a relationship with those, then we need a different kind of myth. We need myths that point to transcendence. Myths that instead of trying to articulate transcendence in a neat and logical and complete way through concepts, they instead of trying to capture reality or surround reality, corral reality, instead of trying to do that, which is what science does, instead they point to a reality. So a scientific theory, if it is a finger, it's a finger that's asking you to look at the finger. You're asked to look at the scientific theory, look at the finger.
Mhm.
A transcendent myth is a finger that's asking you to look at where the finger is pointing, not to the finger itself.
Yeah.
The finger itself is not the thing. The myth itself is not the thing. The thing is what the myth is asking you to look to, is what the myth is pointing at or pointing to, even better. And this is something that can only be done by religious mythology. And when I use the word religions, I don't mean institutional religion. I mean true religion, from the Latin religare, which is to reconnect with the transcendent aspects of reality. And when I say transcendent, I don't mean spiritual. Even it may be spiritual, but I don't mean that. What I mean by transcendent is exactly what the word means: things that transcend our intellectual conceptual abilities. Because why should we believe that the conceptual abilities that monkeys evolved over the last 50,000 years should be enough to capture everything that matters, right?
Yeah.
Of course they are not.
Yeah.
So all you can do is to use mythology to point to something that you can experience intuitively. Now, why can you experience those intuitively?
That's a good question.
Because that's part of nature too, and we are part of nature. We are rooted in nature,
Yeah.
and we can relate to nature through our roots, not only the tree canopy of our conceptual thinking.
Thank you for that. That was wonderful. It makes me wonder. There's been a lot of discussion around the UAP topics, which is ostensibly what my podcast is about, although it's led me to all these other topics and discussions, which I am very grateful for. But there's a discussion of how, in a lot of ways, this is a creation of a new religion, that there's a mythology associated with UAPs that are coming, it's coming into actuality, and whether, I mean, part of the question is, are we creating it ourselves, or is it being foisted on us by some other alien, non-human intelligence? So I guess that's my question for you. Is that mythology, the future mythology that maybe we need to advance, is that what's represented by the UAP phenomenon? And if so, where do you think it's coming from? And also just your general thinking on the UAP NHI phenomenon and how you relate it to all of this idealist philosophy.
Yeah. It is unclear to me whether what we call the UAP phenomenon is really only one phenomenon, or whether there are at least two separate and incommensurable things going on.
Yeah.
That because of some similarities of form, we sort of mistakenly clump and conflate them together in one category. So let me be more explicit and specific. I think there are good reasons for us to contemplate at least two different types of phenomena that go under the label UAP.
Mm-hmm.
One of them are the measurable, physically measurable craft that tend to be around military exercises and military installations.
Yeah.
Things that are picked up by radar, they are filmed through infrared cameras. And if you believe the people who informed David Grush, I believe David Grush.
So do I.
Yeah. So in principle, we can touch them. We can try to drill into them. Some of the occupants, if you believe the people who informed David Grush, are in freezers. So we can slice off pieces of their tissues and look at them under the microscope and do biochemical analysis. So this is one category, this stuff that has a very stable physical phase, concrete, palpable stuff that you can put under a microscope, that you can measure by radar, that you can touch and drill into or slice through if it's a biologic. The other category is the high strangeness category. So that's what people would allude to as alien contact, the contactee phenomenon, or alien abduction.
Yeah.
These are experiences that violate not only the laws of physics, but violate the laws of logic, our own Aristotelian logic, which of course is a kind of faith, because you cannot logically prove the validity of logic without running into circular reasoning, but let's set that aside. Technically, that's called Agrippa's trilemma, by the way, but never mind
Okay.
that. I think there are good reasons to at least entertain the hypothesis that high strangeness or alien abduction, alien contact, the stuff that Whitley Strieber has been writing about for decades now, and which he wrote so well about in his last year's book called Them.
Them, yeah, great
Um,
book.
that's one thing, probably, maybe. And the hardcore, concrete, physical stuff around military exercises and nuclear installations, that's another thing. Maybe they are one and the same thing. What I'm saying is we should not
Assume that.
unthinkingly conflate them.
Yeah.
There are good reasons to entertain the hypothesis that they are two separate things. Now, please remind me of your question because this was supposed to be the context, but I forgot
Oh,
the
well, I was
question.
basically just going to ask that the is the UAP experience or whatever that's going on, is that the myth making for an
Mhm.
idealistic
Mm.
universe?
Yeah,
Could that serve that function? And if so, who's responsible for
yeah,
sticking it at us, sort of?
got it. So, for the sake of argument, let's assume that these two categories are mentioned are actually separate categories, that there are two things going on here. Then my answer would be the stuff around military exercises is not myth making. Um, that is intelligently controlled. I don't think they are extraterrestrials. Um, life has been on this planet for 4 billion years. Anatomically, modern humans have been around for at most 300,000, which is the blink of an eye. Um, even the genus Homus, humans, maybe not modern humans, but humans have been around less than 3 million years. In the context of 4 billion years, that's a blink of an eye ago.
Hmm.
It is, in my view, unreasonable to think that no other intelligent species has evolved in those 4 billion years prior to that, or 4,997,000,000 years before that. I think it's preposterous. Why do we think that was not the case? Because we don't have a record of their presence in the geological record. People would say, well, ancient civilizations that developed enough to be intelligent like us, they would also dig the ground for precious metals and oil to fuel their industrial base. They would pollute the environment with microplastics, all kinds of things that would be visible, detectable today. And this argument is correct only if you assume that such a civilization had to be around up to 10 million years ago. But if they have been around 300 million years ago, this argument is fallacious. Why? Because one, erosion would eliminate any kind of urban or industrial infrastructure on the surface of the planet, and geological and pollution vestiges would disappear because of plate tectonics. The Earth's crust renews itself. What is the crust now under the waters of the oceans? Sinks into the mantle and is reforged. It's melted again, just to resurface a long time later through volcanic activity. So even if there were massive interference with the Earth's crust on most of the surface of the Earth, which is underwater, within 100 million years, that would all have been completely recycled. No mining holes, no infrastructure for extracting hydrocarbons from the ground, no urban infrastructure, no industrial infrastructure, no pollution left on the ground, nothing. Even the continental plates, which are not recycled as fast, they too are more slowly recycled. So the hypothesis here is that there probably was ancient civilizations, intelligent, industrialized, technological, evolved here, not extraterrestrial, evolved here just like we evolved here. And there are no signs left of them because they came to an end for one of the million reasons that can bring us to an end tomorrow: climate change, climate collapse, asteroid or comet impact, a pandemic worse than the one we just survived, or some other cosmic event like a major sunstorm that would fry all technology and leads to chaos in society, people killing one another. All of these things would end a technological civilization and most likely will end ours in time. And then what would happen is that it's unlikely that all of us would die. Some of us would survive in shelters underground. Our technology probably will evolve enough to be small and portable enough. Like computers used to be the size of buildings, now they live in your pocket.
Hmm.
There are nuclear reactors now that are small and portable. You can bury them in your backyard or in a cave. and they would provide endless energy. 3D printing now allows us to make things without building-sized industrial infrastructure. We can build things in a living room with good 3D printers. So assuming that those prior intelligent civilizations advanced to this point, it's very natural to think that after a cataclysm on the surface, they would have gone underground, underwater, bringing some of their technology with them, and they would hardly emerge on the surface anymore because the surface is very exposed. It's exposed to wild temperature swings. It's exposed to weather that can destroy crops and urban infrastructure. It's exposed to the mood of the sun and its solar storms that can fry all technology, like it did in the late 1900s,
Yeah.
fried all telegraph networks on the planet. It's exposed to comet and asteroid impact. They probably would be traumatized and their culture would reorient themselves and go inside the house and let the monkeys stay on the roof.
Yeah.
And we are the monkeys
That's an
on the
image.
roof. And they would only care about us if the monkeys run amok on the roof so badly that it risks the house. Like if the monkeys start throwing nukes at one another, now that's a problem. Now we have to rein in the monkeys, right?
Yeah.
But short of that, let the monkeys riot on the roof. We are safe inside the house. I think that's the explanation for that category of the UAP phenomenon, the one that shows market interest in military infrastructure and
Yeah.
activities, and the one that is probably stored in hangars and freezers around. Now, the other one, the high strangeness part, yes, I think that's a natural phenomenon that prevents us from getting stuck in a mythological local minimum. You know what a local minimum is? In
Uh,
op-
I think so, but I'll trust you to
okay.
explain it.
In mathematics, if you're trying to optimize for something, improve something,
Hmm.
you can draw the solution space in the form of a sort of landscape in 3D.
Hmm.
And what you want is to get to the lowest point in that landscape because that's the lowest cost or the most optimized solution. The problem is the landscape is irregular, so it has these little bumps that constitute local minima, local valleys, so to say.
Yeah.
And when we fall into one of those, in order to continue and reach the global minimum, the global optimum, whatever direction you go, things get worse at first
Yeah.
before they get much better than before. And you get stuck in a local minimum when you realize that whatever way you go, things get worse. So you tend to accommodate yourself to where you are.
Ah,
And then you will never find the real thing, the
yeah. Yeah.
global minimum, because you don't want to run the risk of letting things become less clear at first before they get more clear.
Yeah.
Um, there is, I think, a natural tendency in the mind of nature. If nature is trying to figure itself out, there is a natural tendency in the mind of nature to try to dislodge us from local minima. When our understanding of nature is good enough to make us comfortable, but not true yet, can get a lot better, but we refuse to depart from this point of comfort, to allowing things to get worse before they get better, then something in nature reacts to that and confronts us with anomalies that cannot be accounted for with our current comfy theories.
Yeah.
And that's the high strangeness phenomenon. The high strangeness phenomenon, one interpretation is it's a natural process in the mind of nature that when it realizes that we are getting too accommodated, it comes to us and says, "Oh, yeah, you think you figured it out? Look at this. How about this?"
Hmm.
You see?
Yeah. Yeah.
It confronts us with the reality that we haven't figured hardly anything out yet. There is much more to be figured out. And
Which
nature
goes,
confronts us with that.
it's the ontological shock is the point.
The ontological shock is the point. It's what
Yeah.
forces us to review our little comfy conceptual fantasies, our comfy mythology, our convenient fictions, and forces us to confront the reality that there is a lot more to be made sense of. And this extra may require not only a departure from our understanding of physics, which is not that difficult. We have departed many times before from previous understandings of physics. 400 years ago, the understanding of physics was such that whatever you couldn't hold in your hand was not physically real. In other words, no electromagnetic fields, radio, television, internet, none of that would be real.
Hmm.
Electricity wouldn't be real. And then we started thinking in terms of classical fields, like the electromagnetic field of Faraday and Maxwell and the gravitational field of Newton. And then we realized that no, even those are not right. It's quantum fields, which are even more abstract, more indirect. So we have departed from our understanding of physics many times, and we may have to depart again. But more importantly, we may have to depart with our logic, with the five Aristotelian axioms of logic.
Mm-hmm.
And that's much more difficult because we take logic to be something that is self-evidently true and does not require proof,
Yeah.
which is a good thing because logic cannot be proven.
Yeah.
Logic
Yeah.
is a set of axioms. In other words, things that are not provable. And the phenomenon may be naturally confronting us with the reality that even our very logic, our conceptual categories, the templates of our reason, they themselves may not be sufficient. They may even be inadequate to capture what is actually going on.
Yeah.
And that may be a natural mental process or not.
Yeah.
It may be that whatever agents are behind the military UAP phenomenon are also behind the high strangeness aspect of the phenomenon. They are all one and the same thing. That may be the case too. Right now, we do not have enough reliable, publicly available data to categorically say that it's one or the other. I don't know.
Yeah.
I may even have more access than most people, and I don't know.
Yeah. It's interesting to me, though, like when you talk about your ontology, none of it dismisses the facts that we know and understand and we use to make scientific prediction. It's not as if you become an idealist, all of a sudden all the rules fly out the window. It's more like there's an intellectual humility that humanity has to come to where it understands these as myths, like you were saying, that these are tools in order to make predictions, in order to develop gadgets and circuit boards and all those sorts of things. And on that level, they're very effective, but that's not the global view. And as beings on a planet with, very limited perspective, we may not be entitled to that view, at least in this life. And that's a humbling, but not necessarily an overturning of our society, right?
No, of course not. Uh, Science is busy with predicting what nature will do next. That's what science is all about. Science
Yeah.
is not in the business of defining what nature is. It's predicting what nature will do next. The entities in theories, as we talked about earlier, are convenient fictions. There is no such invisible force of gravity. There
Mhm.
is no such invisible fabric of space-time. These are convenient uh, convenient theoretical entities that allow us to operationalize a prediction of what nature will do next. It doesn't matter if they are real or not. What matters is that nature behaves as though they were real up to a certain point.
Yeah.
So science doesn't tell us what nature is. The method of science is incapable of doing that because the empirical method of defining an experiment and then and running the experiment and seeing how nature will react, well, that reaction is a behavior of nature, is what nature will do in response to your experimental conditions. So science is about predicting what nature would do next, not what nature is. Philosophies, metaphysics specifically, is about what nature might be, and it's not something that is directly empirically uh, provable. It is empirically provable or falsifiable, but not as directly as setting up an experiment to see what nature would do next, because then you
Yeah.
just look at what nature does, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
With metaphysics, it's not as simple. So idealism is another metaphysics. But that new metaphysics does not change the scientific predictions of what nature will do next. On the contrary, idealism allows us to understand the predictions of science. For instance, quantum mechanics predicts that physical entities do not have standalone existence, that physical properties only arise upon measurement. And by the way, uh, almost 45 years of experiments have now proven this, and that's why they got the Nobel Prize in 2022. Short of some theoretical fantasies like unprovable, inaccessible parallel universes, or undefined, unprovable, convenient hidden variables, short of those theoretical fantasies, Physical entities do not have standalone existence. They are the outcome of measurement. Idealism makes sense of it
Yeah.
because under idealism, physical entities are representations on a dashboard. And if you don't make a measurement, there is nothing for the dashboard to represent.
Well,
But the thing that you measure exists for real. It's just not physical.
mhm.
Physicality is what appears on the dashboard. So if you want physicality, you have to make a measurement in order to have what to represent. The thing that is measured does have standalone existence. It does exist prior to measurement, but it's not physical. You see, so this is an example of idealism not only not contradicting science, which it doesn't.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Any metaphysics that contradicts established science is just wrong.
Yeah.
Idealism doesn't. And beyond that, it helps us make sense of scientific theories and observations. We tend, as a culture, to very naively think that technological prowess implies deep metaphysical understanding of what nature is. Like, well, we have been able to create the internet to cure countless diseases, to manipulate our genes, put a man on the moon.
So we got
If
to
we
know what's
can do,
going on.
we
Yeah.
must know what's going on,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We gotta know what nature is, otherwise we wouldn't have been able to do all this. Now, this is an incredibly naive and fallacious perspective,
Hmm.
which but let me try to illustrate with a metaphor. Do you have kids?
Yes. I have 4 kids.
How old is your youngest kid?
10.
Does he play computer games?
She and yes.
She is she good at playing computer games?
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
Now imagine a 10-year-old kid that is good at computer games, just like your kid, and is so good that she or he is world champion in a certain computer game.
Mhm.
Total, absolute prowess in that computer game. Like the boy who broke Tetris yesterday, which is
Yeah.
news today.
Yeah.
We are speaking early January 2024.
Yes.
The fact that the kid plays the game so well as to be world champion, does that mean that the kid understands the game, understands all the hardware and software engineer that goes into the game?
Yeah. No.
No.
Yeah.
Your daughter doesn't understand the
Mm-mm.
iPad, right?
No.
Or the phone she uses to play
Or
computer game.
binary or programming or any
Yeah,
of that stuff. Yeah. It's all just a,
exactly.
yeah.
So what does this show? What this shows is that you don't need to understand what's going on in order to use what's going on to your benefit.
Yeah.
The kid does not need to understand the computer game to be world champion. We don't need to understand what's going on in order to develop technology. All we need is what the kid has to win the computer game. What the kid has is a convenient fiction, and it goes like this: I am a little man in the screen, or a little woman in the screen. If I shoot those other little people in the screen, I score points.
Hmm.
If they shoot me, I lose energy or I die. If I touch that wall, I get electrocuted and die. If I reach that room, I win the game. That's all the kid needs.
Yeah.
This convenient fiction is enough to play the game. Now, notice that every single element of this fiction is wrong. You are not a little man in the screen. You are not in the screen.
Yeah.
There are no other little men in the screen. Nobody's shooting anybody. There are no rooms. There are no electrified walls. You don't die
Yeah.
in the screen. Everything is wrong, but the game behaves as though those things were true up to a certain point.
Yeah.
If you start taking an oscilloscope to the phone, you realize that the game doesn't quite behave according to the convenient fiction. But if you're only looking at the screen, it does.
Yeah.
We are 10-year-old kids playing a computer game very well, only looking at the screen. And we have the convenient fictions we need to do that.
Yeah.
None of this implies that we understand what's going on, that we understand the metaphysics of what's going on. And that's what people have to keep in mind.
Yeah. It sounds, I mean, a lot like Donald Hoffman's ideas about like basically we evolve and survive, and the survival is winning the computer game. And so none of that means that we need to understand the bits and bytes that go behind it because that's not part of the interface.
Exactly.
Last question. I mean, I've had you for an hour and a half, so I appreciate your time. I really do. Um, I had a conversation with Nick Cook, who is an author and a student of consciousness and has done a lot of great work, a really nice guy. And he was saying that he feels like a change is a coming, that basically there is going to be a moment where these ideas reach critical mass and there is this intellectual evolution. As one of the thought leaders, I would say, of this movement, do you think that that's actually happening, or are you less optimistic about there actually being a shift in how we conceive of our reality, or are we just, are we stuck?
Oh, no, no,
Last
it
question.
is happening. I wish I could tell you every reason I have to say this.
Yeah,
It's happening, it's palpable, it's penetrating deeper than the vast majority of people would ever guess.
yeah,
And the process of this becoming public lags far behind the process of things changing.
yeah,
Things are changing very, very deeply right now. Where we are now compared to 15 years ago, it's like wine and water. The physicalism is privately in large swaths of academia uh, an abandoned idea. But when your field is such that to be a professional in your field, you do not have to have a metaphysical commitment, as in most of science, with a couple of exceptions, why are you going to risk your career by coming public with your metaphysical views? People don't do that.
yeah,
What they do, and if you pay attention, you will see this happening a lot, they choose their words more carefully in technical literature to avoid an implicit commitment to the physicalist metaphysics. Their words are chosen so as to be more metaphysically neutral. So they focus on the science, not the metaphysics, by mistake, even when they don't intend to do so.
mhm.
The people who very strongly defend the metaphysics, um, I was about to say they are idiots. And yeah, okay, they're idiots, and that the idiocy here is that when you build a career of distinguishing yourself intellectually in contrast to non-physicalists, and your whole persona is built around that, you find yourself in a catch-22. It is impossible for you to stay intellectually honest without damage to your persona and your career.
Yeah, yeah,
And a lot of those people are not scientists in the sense that they are not practicing scientists at all. Some of them don't even have a scientific degree, they have a bachelor's in something. Um, and even those who have doctorates, a lot of them are so busy talking about science that they are not doing science.
mhm.
And they have been talking about science for 20 or 30 years. And uh, there have been a few changes in that period that if you had still been doing science and philosophy, you would have known of.
Yeah,
But you're now a public figure. You earn money by being interviewed by the media to provide the skeptical traditional point of view, or you may even be a university professor. But in parallel to that, you built a public persona in debates and interviews, and you see yourself as being the arbiter of reason. And then you think that you're entitled to go publicly and question the character of David Grush.
yeah,
The idiocy reaches that level. I think people who do that are unethical and idiots
yeah,
because it's the same people who promote scientific pseudoscience, pseudoscience, theoretical pseudoscience, like
yeah,
parallel universes accounting for every discombobulating quantum measurement because the known discombobulating measurement, of course, happened. It's just in an inaccessible parallel universe for which we have precisely zero empirical evidence and for which we can never have, in principle, any empirical evidence.
mhm.
Or that there are undefined but highly convenient hidden variables that accommodate all the expectations of physicalism, even though we don't know what these hidden variables are, how they could work, and we have no way to test the hypothesis at all. It's an unfalsifiable hypothesis. These are the idiocies that come along with David Grush is obviously a quack, a wacko, mentally debilitated someone because the things he's talking about are against my metaphysical views.
Yeah.
So this is what you get. And unfortunately, these people are much more visible than the real scientists and the real philosophers doing the real work, choosing their words carefully. They're much more visible.
Yeah.
But eventually, there will be a reversal
Yeah.
because the change of a metaphysics is a grassroots movement in science and in the culture at large. The bad-mouthed pseudo-skeptics make a lot of noise, but there is an indelibility to reason and evidence that even if you scream very loudly, eventually reason and evidence put you down.
Yeah.
And we overcome, or eventually you will die and you are replaced by people who are closer to reason and evidence,
Well, there's a
which is
quote
how
there
science
somewhere
progresses.
where scientific revolutions only occur when the old guard dies off. I
Yeah,
can't
science
rem
progresses one funeral at a time.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And not to wish anybody dead, but I can't wait to see the progress.
It
That's all I have for you. Thank you so
was
much
a
for doing
great
this.
talk. It was a
Yeah, yeah.
pleasure.
And I will maybe reach out at some point in the future to talk again if that's okay with you.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm game.
I'm sure you're going to keep working, and I love your books. So thank you.
Thank you, sir.